Hello, and welcome to Behind the Bit. So this is the first episode of Behind the Bit. This is really like an entire category of like behind the scenes content, similar to the Green Room, but I figured this might make sense to break off into its own playlist because it really is a very specific category of behind the scenes content focused on the individual bits of stand-up material, kind of analyzing them, giving some background into them, and looking at what doesn't work, at what works, and maybe process notes. You know, this is a learning and iterative experience for me. So maybe one of the things that's interesting to me is that I put out the content on YouTube when it's not done yet. It is kind of that maybe 70, 80, 90% done, somewhere in there. Like I've already iterated on it a ton, spent a lot of time and work on it, but it's going to keep evolving as I get chances to deliver it in more and more settings. So this is an opportunity to look at these bits and just kind of talk about them. If you're interested in the comedic process in writing, then this is probably your jam. And if it's not, then all right, cool. There's other stuff. Maybe this isn't for you. So the first one I want to talk about is really the first bit that I recorded here, which is the Russian Snake Island, Ukrainian Snake Island, Russian language, but the go fuck yourself bit, the Linguistic Fuckery as it's titled. So to start by giving some background on that piece, so I was a Mormon missionary in Russia and Siberia for 2 years. So that was where, in the bit when I say that I studied Russian in Siberia for 2 years, I did other stuff too. Like as a missionary, that wasn't actually my primary focus, but it was something that I spent at least an hour on every single day, literally just studying the language. So obviously there was language prep before I went there that was a nice little primer. But truthfully, the vast majority of my learning in Russian came from every single day sitting down and studying it. And eventually that study, as I got more and more confident in the language, really came down to I carried a notebook with me, and every time I heard a word that I didn't understand, I would write it down. Because you do get to that point where you're understanding 95% of what's being said, and you can pick out that one thing that somebody said, right? Like the borders around that are defined enough that you can go, that was a singular word that I didn't understand, and you can write it down. And you can ask the person for the definition too, if they're good with it, if that's the kind of setting. Otherwise, you just come back then, and every morning I have this list of words that I don't know, and I can look them up in my dictionary, and then once you do that, you start hearing the words everywhere. Some new word, you'll write it down, and then suddenly you hear it everywhere for the next week. It's interesting. The whole process of learning another language is fascinating to me. Russian, especially because it does have, I think, a well-earned reputation for being one of the more difficult languages for English speakers to learn. The grammar is entirely different. I almost said grammatica, which is the word. The grammar is very different. The words, I would say, this is something you could do some research on. I believe that the words in common usage, there are a larger number of words in common usage than in English. However, that said, English has more total words, and we tend to, anyways. But like the common circulation, like the vocabulary that you need on a day-to-day basis to survive, I believe is larger in Russian. Not that it really matters. Like either way, learning an entire language is just it's a lot of words. It's a lot of memorization. And you just have to speak it. You just have to get out there and speak it, which is really, I believe, why being out there in and among the people in an immersive environment and talking, like needing to talk, was such a fantastic way to learn the language. Because there are entire communities of people that live in sort of expat situations. Like in Minneapolis here, there's 16,000 Eastern Europeans that literally have their own enclave, like their own area, and some of them they never need to learn to speak English really, or the English that they speak is just this tiny bit. And as a missionary over there, I was part of an expat community that was which wasn't to say I lived in like a neighborhood or anything like that, but I mean, there were always like 10, 15, 20 or 30 of us in any city that all spoke English. And if we wanted to, we could have just mostly relied on that community and learned only the minimum amount to get by. And you see this here in the United States too. If you've lived in any sort of area that have large communities of people that have immigrated from other countries, it's just like at a certain point, it takes a lot of work to really get fluent in a language. And most people don't have that kind of energy. But for me, as a missionary, like so much of my efficacy came down to my ability to communicate clearly. So learning Russian was huge. And that's why I spent so much time with it. Once upon a time, I did speak it freely, that's how you'd say it, fluently. In Russian, they say "Я говорил свободно," so freely. Is kind of how they say fluent. So once upon a time, I was fluent, and that was really cool. It's been years. Oh my God, it's been like 15 years since I came back, and of course, you lose a lot in that time. My accent is still okay. I get feedback on that a lot. The few times when I get to use my Russian, and that's super fun. I actually very recently was asked if I was born in Russia, which was very flattering. And then we spoke for another couple of minutes in Russian, and they clearly they understood, like, oh no, he doesn't. But the few phrases that I still remember very well, apparently I accent is okay. I don't know why I'm going down that rabbit hole. All that to say, like, I love language. I love Russian. I miss it. I genuinely miss speaking Russian on the regular. And there's so many tangents we could go down there as far as like how your language impacts your thinking. This is not in like a what's the word? Not in the sense of like multiple personalities, like a disorder, but I can tell you that when I spoke Russian, when I was speaking in Russian, and I got to the point where I was thinking in Russian too, like it was almost like flipping a switch in my brain to where I was no longer thinking in English and translating in my head on the fly. Like you just get to the point where you're literally just thinking and speaking in another language. And when you hit that, like I know that when I flipped that switch, the personality that I had, the way that I thought about things, the way that I approached some situations was different, only slightly. Like I wasn't a completely different person, but like the language that you communicate in and think in and speak in, it does impact who you are. And that was a really fascinating thing for me to experience. I think I was actually more assertive in Russian, which is weird. A weird thing to think about and kind of admit. But that's probably enough background on that. So that was background on language. Background on the bit. This really is... one of the things that maybe doesn't work for me or doesn't work as well is the title. Linguistic Fuckery is, I mean, it's kind of a fun description, and it's maybe the most accurate description of the bit itself, because the thing is really just having fun with language and understanding how, somebody says "go fuck yourself" in another language, which is like, discussing cursing, profanity between languages is always kind of fun. So that name Linguistic Fuckery is accurate, but it's also not like, it's not great from a marketing perspective. That's one of the things that I think doesn't work super well. It really only matters in like YouTube land, because if I'm on a stage telling this, I don't talk about the title. I'm not like, and now we're going to go into the bit titled Linguistic Fuckery, right? You're just telling jokes. So from that standpoint, like, who cares what it's called or what you reference it, but the title of the video in YouTube is maybe not fantastic. But whatever. It is really just linguistics, and to that end, it is accurate. I got in a I don't want to say fight, but there was a commenter who told me that I should be using it should be thyself, like get thyself onto a dick. And then we kind of went back and forth, and I was like, well, I mean, it was good enough for Shakespeare. And then he was like, yeah, but if it was going to be modernized, we would say thyself. And I was like, well, but we didn't modernize it. Like, that's the whole thing. It's dead. Like, thee, thyself, that it's all gone. And, there's get thee to a nunnery and get thee hence and get thee behind me, Satan. And there's all these examples of get thee location, that formula that sort of, I think, justify this particular interpretation of it. But that's one of the things about linguistic interpretation and translation, is that it is an interpretive exercise. There are different ways to interpret something, because so many of the languages that we speak in, and this is especially true of Russian and English, so many things do not have a direct translation. There is, you're translating the words, and this is why I love linguistics and languages. It's because each word in the thought has a thought behind it. That gets translated. And so the overall thought that you're translating and pulling together is itself a collection of other thoughts that together form one whole thought. So you're drawing equivalencies between the individual words that sort of make up the phrase, and then you hope, or like it's a dance, it's a push and pull, because you want to be accurate in translating the individual words, but as you translate the individual words, then the overall thought that those words portray may not be exactly the thought that's portrayed in the original language. So you can sometimes then play with some of the individual words to sacrifice accuracy of the wording in order to get greater accuracy of the overall concept or thought, the compound thought, if you will, or you can go the other way around. Either way, for so many of these, there is no direct equivalence, and that's true here in this case. So I love complexity, especially complexity of thought, and that's what language is. And it's a fun place to fun place to play in. Yeah, if I can talk myself here. So the title then, like that's one thing as we talk about what doesn't work and what does work. What doesn't work, the title for me is kind of like, it doesn't really work. But again, that's really only a YouTube artifact. On stage, it doesn't really translate. So the title doesn't really work for me. Another thing that doesn't really work for me is the opening. Or maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So starting with the whole, like, my favorite thing about the atrocities, and actually maybe I think I changed that on stage. I'm trying to remember if that's how it starts in the bit that I recorded. Anyways, that was one thing that changed, because I said, like, my favorite thing about the war in Ukraine, and I was like, no, my favorite thing about the atrocities, because that opening is like that juxtaposition of, like, having a favorite part of atrocities. If your brain is weird like mine, it makes you kind of laugh and go like, that's fucked up. I don't know that there are enough people that are fucked up that in that way that actually respond that way. And especially when it comes to YouTube videos, I think there's a certain number of people who, as soon as they see that, think this is going somewhere else entirely. Like, I'm pro-Russia, pro-Putin, pro all of that, and I am totally not. And so they hear that and just go, next. Again, maybe this is just an artifact of YouTubia, because if you're on a stage, like, they're going to listen to the whole bit unless they walk up and run out, right? You're going to get the chance on a stage to actually convey the whole thought, which is sort of, better. But so that, whether or not that works, I don't know. I've certainly heard laughs at that part, where I say my favorite thing about the atrocities in Ukraine, and then you go, haha, and you're like, yep, you're fucked up too. It's sort of like, it's funny when that happens. But I don't know. As far as what does work for it, so, it's a current event, and that, especially when something is current and sort of memey, like it's there are memes about it, and you see people discussing it. It's come back recently because that ship has been sunk, which is kind of cool. There's a resurgence in interest there, but it's timely, maybe, is the way to put that. That has there's another edge to that sword, which is that, a year from now or 2 years from now, like, nobody's like, they're going to watch that and be like, oh yeah, I guess that did happen, right? But for now, at least, it's kind of a plus. And it is kind of a tribute. like I kind of like that about it too. Like at the end of the day, it is kind of a tribute. Like these are some amazing, incredible people who, you know, when put in a very difficult situation, chose bravery and loyalty. And, you know, you could say stupidity. Maybe that cost them their lives. But there's a certain part of us that even in the face of that, like we envy that. We wish we were that brave. There is something aspirational to that, even if some part of us says like, okay, but maybe that's a dumb thing. Maybe the catharsis of it isn't worth it. But I don't know. I still think it's cool. And as a tribute to those soldiers, I think it's pretty neat. And then maybe the other thing that I'm kind of proud of with that bit is how well encapsulated it is. In other words, this was the first bit that I ever wrote to be given to a live audience, to be given at a stand-up event, an open mic night. And it is like it has a beginning and an end and a callback, and like it's the whole, like it develops well. It has, the pacing is like, there's a certain school of thought in stand-up, which is you want about one laugh a minute. You can actually exhaust the audience if you get laughs too quickly, too often, right? To where, like, if you have a long bit and you're just constant punchline, 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 like after 5 minutes, everyone's sides hurt, and then you're not, like, it's not even, like you become numb to the humor at a certain point. So there is kind of a correct pacing that people, that is sort of like theorized to exist. And I think the pacing is pretty good for this. Like there's some okay ha-ha moments. There's some sort of like snort through your nose, or just like, I appreciate the cleverness of that. And then there's like one or two decent laughs. And the whole thing with, like, you know, the bear and the vodka, like that's an unexpected, like that's like kind of the classic comedic left turn. But overall, for such a short piece, I think I'm pretty proud of how it's composed. As far as process notes go, this will be the last thing, and then we'll call it for this episode. As far as process goes, one of the things that I learned a lot from this bit was cutting the fat. So when I wrote this, and I can't say that I've, like, I say I learned it here, I can't say I'm perfect at it yet, because I think if we examine, and as we examine some of the other bits I've done since then, there are places where I could have cut fat and didn't, should have, and will, if I, like, next chance I get a chance to give them in public. But when I originally wrote out this joke, it was like 5 or 6 minutes. And I taped myself, and it was, 5 minutes, 4.5. And I went like, oh my God, I'm going to go to this open mic. They're going to cut my mic at 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So I was like, I need to trim this. And it was this exercise in, you know, cutting 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes of material out of a 5-minute bit is like cutting it in half. So I had to really whittle down and say, what are the pieces of this joke that are, like, what are the pieces of the setup that are actually required for the joke, and what are the ones that are maybe just more flavor and background, or me indulging myself in telling a story, as I do in this venue. So I had to really examine it and pull things out and say, that's nice, I think it's kind of funny, or maybe I like it, but it's not necessary for the joke. Cut it out. And then, even once I had that, I remember as I was timing myself and giving the joke, I eventually got it down to 2 minutes and 51 seconds. And that was with flawless delivery. Like, I would turn on the camera, I would start giving the bit, and if I went pretty quick through it and didn't mess up at all, 2 minutes and 51 seconds. So I looked at that and went, okay, I have 9 minutes of screw up time. Like, I can miss a beat and look for my line for, you know, a few seconds here or a few seconds there, and that's all I get. But it was enough. And that exercise of needing to really trim down the fat, while there was kind of an artificial constraint in this point, like in this instance, it was still a very valuable exercise. So I was behind the bit for Linguistic Fuckery. So thanks for watching.